So I actually used the rear stand from the 848, and I took all y'all's advice, but I thought you'd appreciate this. I was able to get like a nice little course, also taking some of Keith's advice. I used up more of the driveway we have, the back straight, assuming that the 3-year-old can read, and slow, and then turn, and then eyes up, because he's not looking, down, another little rumble, and then for the win, ching ching, winner, winner, chicken dinner. So, yeah, I don't know who's having more fun with this, him or me.
A huge welcome to the first ever virtual Cornwall Time to Move PE and School Sport and Physical Activity Conference. My name is Tim Marion and I lead on our children, young people and families work at Active Cornwall. I'm just going to start today by quickly running through some of the housekeeping. This first session that you're all in is going to last about 1.5 hours and it is being recorded. So if it makes you feel a bit more comfortable and you want your camera on and you want to turn it off, please do so. Please do mute your microphones. I think everybody has been muted. And we'll make use of the chat function if you've got any questions. This chat function is going to be monitored throughout the day and throughout this session this morning, and we will try and address and come to some of the questions that you've got at the end. But we've also got the pre-planned Q&A session from the questions that were sent in, so thank you very much for them. All of the presentations you see today and the recordings will be made available to download from the Active Cornwall website. So if you go into that website and we'll make it really clear on the front. We'll make sure they're up and ready to go from probably the middle of next week, so you can see that. And at the end of this session this morning, I'm going to run through how the 3 other sessions will work, the cluster networking if you booked on that, and the 2 workshops this afternoon. So just before we move on straight away into our keynote speakers, I'm going to start by setting the scene really on the journey that we've been on for the past few years. We all know in Cornwall that the goal to have every child to achieve a minimum of 60 minutes activity per day, 30 minutes within the school and 30 minutes outside of the school. Well, back in 2017-18, when we got some of the first data for children and young people, we knew in Cornwall, that figure on the right there in the grey, the silver, 44.4% of children achieved this. And in 2018-19, we know we moved that up to 50.8% of children in Cornwall. So we were going in the right direction. But we still had this figure on the left in the red there that's highlighted, 24.7% of children in Cornwall classed as inactive, so achieving under 30 minutes of activity per day. This isn't structured sport, it's just activity, moderate to vigorous activity per day. So we're just going to take a minute now. I'm going to pause straight away and just let you have a think. If you think about a class in your school, a typical class, do you agree with this? Can you picture that a quarter of that class are inactive and not moving, not being active for 30 minutes per day? Just have a little think about that for a minute. Picture that class. Sometimes I think it's really good to just reflect and picture the children we're working in with Cornwall and can we see those figures that we're working with? In December, we're also due to receive the 2019-20 data, and this will include activity levels at the end of the first lockdown we had back in the summer term. We also know from that period that there was 36% of children nationally did less activity. So all of a sudden, the level of this challenge has been increased to get every child in Cornwall to achieve 60 minutes. So are we up for the challenge? And are we up for the challenge to create the right environment for children to be active during and in the recovery from COVID-19, which is the theme of today's conference? We definitely saw the owner of the driveway in the opening video create the right environment. And I thought that was a great video to show how that gentleman on his drive created the right environment for those children to be active. And please consider this theme as you listen to our keynote speakers today and attend your workshops. Right at this point, I was going to pass you over to the chair of our Strategic PE and School Sport Physical Activity Alliance, Richard Higginson, who's a deputy head teacher at Newquay Chathera School. But in typical fashion, I don't think Richard's on the call this morning. He's been in touch with me and they've had an emergency at the school and something that he needs to deal with in his position. So I know Richard wanted to say a massive thank you. What we saw over that lockdown period over the summer term, all the examples that we collected and that got sent into us of where schools have been really innovative of what they did to ensure children were still active during that period. And we collated and shared through the Time to Move bulletin some really good, the weekly comms that we sent out, some great examples. So that was really good to see. And it was also great to see when schools did open back up, how we know a number of our colleagues across Cornwall have made sure PE and school sport and physical activity is on the agenda at schools. So a huge thank you from Richard for what was achieved over that period and what was being achieved in the first half term as schools went back. There was also a huge achievement with the summer winter games. And yes, we had to be very innovative. We had to think outside the box and we delivered the virtual games in the summer. And we had over 10,000 young people in Cornwall take part in those games and over 40,000 different individual unique results registered through the system. And that was just huge and just shows how the whole of our network, the whole of the PE School Sport and Physical Activity Network in Cornwall really did mobilise to ensure children could be active during that period and really take part in something that made them feel good and something that they could celebrate over those times. So a huge thank you from all of the colleagues in education, from Richard Higginson there, and a specific thank you to our school games organisers, the 4 school games organisers again that have really thought outside the box and what they delivered in that period moving forward. So we're going to move straight on to our first keynote speaker, and I just want to kick off again by saying a huge thank you to Sue Wilkinson from the Association for Physical Education. There's been a lot going on this week, it's fair to say, and I know Sue's been a very busy lady with what she's had to deal with and what afPE have turned around. So I really do appreciate Sue giving up her time to join us today in Cornwall. She did join us for one of our Strategic Alliance forums back in that summer term, and it was great to hear from her then. And it was on the back of that we invited her to come back down to this conference and speak to more of us in Cornwall about the work afPE have been doing and are doing and being really innovative as they react to the situation that we're in. So I'm going to pass you straight over to Sue, and I think Sue's going to share her own screen with her presentation that they've got there.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Tim, and thank you so much for inviting us down here. I'm not going to do the technology. My colleague Simon Roach will be doing it, but you should be able to see all the slides now. Just before we start, I just want to echo everything Tim has said about you as a workforce, because we need to recognise you are the bedrock of the education system, and without you, we don't have any provision for children and young people. And what is really important in all of this is you are not forgotten. Your physical and emotional well-being has to be at the forefront, else we're being a bit hypocritical here. Because if you don't look after yourselves, you're not going to be able to look after the young people. And because you give so much, so unselfishly, it's really important that you don't forget yourself. So if you could, just remember you're human too, and please talk to people, whoever you feel best to talk with. Ask for help if you need it, because you cannot keep going on at 110%, else you're actually going to be even more exhausted than you already are. Okay, Simon, could I have the first slide, please? Now, this is our starting point for today. And that is about celebrating what you're doing. And we mustn't look back except to see how far you've travelled and what a journey the last 7 months have been. And we just know from our members and the sort of exponential rise in questions, support we've been asked for, that it's almost as if teachers have lost some of their confidence because of what has happened. But you have to believe in your professional judgment, because you've done a brilliant job. I know you feel exhausted, and I know you probably all want to scream and tear your hair out despite just having a half term, but please have that belief that what you're doing is good and have some hope. We hope that government may review some of the decisions going forward, and we hope to have a successful lifting of the lockdown on the 2nd of December. As Tim has said, afPE has been right under the cosh recently, and it's been really, really tough. And it was funny because in the summer I thought, right, I'm going to go now. It's time for me to retire and put my boots up. And we had a lot of issues on social media. And someone sent me this quote, which I've sort of adapted really. And they said, don't fear the pressure suit, because it's what turns, you know, rough stones into diamonds. And it was the best advice I'd ever had. And I'd just say, you know, think about that. When we're under pressure, we often perform to our best standard. And I think it's really important that you think about what's gone on and what you've achieved. Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is just do a whistle-stop tour. Now, we have always had a large maze to navigate in education. You know, if it's not SATs, it's GCSE, it's all sorts of different guidance coming out. You know, there are lots of things we have to contend with, but we always get through that. But at the moment, it probably feels like the next slide. This is probably the maze we're in. It's all tangled up, it's all confused, and in the heart of this are all these young people. We know the advice that's come out recently has been one that raises lots of questions, and we understand that. So what we're asking of you all is to reactivate PESPA in this hopefully temporary COVID world. So on the next slide, what we've done is gone through all the different principles. There are only 5. And what we're asking primary, secondary and colleagues in special educational needs provision schools to look at how we can go forward with just a simple set of 5 principles. The first is the re-engagement. We know that children and young people have had a torrid time. The research is raw and it's new, but we know physically and emotionally they have been suffering. Now, we know previous to COVID, they were actually suffering emotionally well in many young people across the communities. They really need support for all sorts of pressures. We can't be the Swiss Army knife. We cannot solve every societal problem, but we can be part of a solution. So what we feel is if we can re-engage young people, you are frontline workers, we believe. You've also been working with frontline workers, children and young people. Have they settled in better than those children who have been off a lot longer? What was the dip like when they came back after the 6 weeks holidays? Was it the normal dip we get after a summer break? Or were our children and young people better or worse off or the same? So what we want to do is get them back into a really positive mindset. We're asking for a broad and balanced curriculum, which is synonymous with what Ofsted are asking you. Ofsted are going out at the moment on a fact-finding mission, and it's really positive, the feedback from schools. There's not a judgment to be made. You just get your letter, very much as I'd spoken to you and Steve spoke to the secondary colleagues in the summer, that, you know, you get the letter about all the things they found to give a national picture. But what they're asking is, we need a broad and balanced curriculum. We don't need a COVID curriculum. If we have a COVID curriculum, we could end up with a very narrow focus, which is not going to help anybody. But we do know that actually we're going to have to manage how we put that broad and balance, particularly with the new guidance that has come out over the weekend. What we're asking primary colleagues to do is a self-review against those 5 key indicators which actually fund your primary P&S premium, which I know Jayne will mention later on. And for secondary colleagues, it may help just to have a look at those indicators, because if you actually match them next to the 4 aims of the national curriculum, they are synonymous. Now, I'd like to say that was planned, but it wasn't, because the time frame didn't fit, but they do match very, very well. And you can see those on any of the national partners' websites if you want to have a look and download them, because it's everything Tim said on his first slide about getting children physically active, having the right skills in the workforce to deliver that, having extra bits of competition as and when we can, but we can still compete against ourselves. And then have a look at how COVID is going to impact on a broad and balanced curriculum. And then last but not least are the safe practice principles. Now, there is a triangle which is in part of our COVID guidance. And at the bottom of that broad base of the triangle is the employer. The employer's advice trumps everybody's. And that's really, really important. Then on top of that triangle, you have the Department for Education's guidance. And then at the top, you've got other partners' guidance, whether it's afPEs, NGBs, or what have you. But your employer's guidance is critical. Those risk assessments are core. And as long as those are in place, we think everything will be fine. Okay, Simon, can I have the next slide? Now, this one says it all for me, because it depends where you stand. And it doesn't mean anybody is wrong, but I am sure from the guidance you've seen, interpretation will differ across the country. It will differ on your context. And that's very, very hard to manage, but it doesn't mean someone's right and someone's wrong. You know, we have been inundated, 1,700 inquiries in the first 48 hours is quite phenomenal. We've never seen anything like that. And it was quite interesting because we thought we had the answers. But actually, when people present you with a context that you didn't actually consider, that's quite difficult. We have one school where we filmed for BBC, marvellous primary school, state school with its own swimming pool, which is deemed to be a classroom, albeit one full of water. Now, do you not use that swimming pool because of guidance, or can you use it from 9 till 3, but you can't use it afterwards? So there are all sorts of challenges out there. It doesn't mean if you get an answer, you're wrong, we're right, and vice versa. It's about your perception, but we have to do it in a really professional way, because I'm sure you've seen some of the things on social media. So what we did over the summer was try and put some practical advice in place that gives straight yes and no to try and help you. So Simon, can we pull up the posters, please? Now, this first poster, you may have seen it, it's free, download it, it's on the internet. You can also adapt it. And it's about reactivating that learning, bringing in place things we can do for our children and young people, irrespective of the context in which you're working. Now, we've got 4 elements of that. And that is the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, and the social well-being of our young people. Within the diamond, on the red, pinky colour, whichever it comes out on your screen, are all the things people were telling us, the children, the workforce, head teachers, what were telling us they were experiencing when the children came to school. This is what's wrong with our children. This is what they're telling us. And actually, one very sort of creative head got the children to colour code it. Did they feel this way about this? Did it not bother them? So that's green. And actually looked at how far they could move them. Oh, my slider's gone, but is it? Can anyone see the slides, or is it just me? Has there been a break?
Yeah, I think, I know it's back.
Thank you very much. So the pink diamonds are everything that's wrong. And then the purple are solutions. You know, the what and the how, if you like. Can we have the next slide, Simon, please? And then if you look at the quadrangle one, those highlight all the different, you do the what, and see if that, and add to it. But please use it and have a look at how it actually supports your young people. You know, if you can ask the office for a Word copy and you can alter it and add to it. But what it actually does is help to reactivate learning. Now, if you do end up having some kind of visit from Ofsted, be it in this term or in January, where planned inspections are supposed to start, but we don't know that yet. If they do start, this is a great way of demonstrating how you have used your resources during COVID, whether that's financial, whether it's to do with funds from the grants, whether it's primary, or whether you're using your Sport England Teaching Schools Alliance's funding. It doesn't matter what sort of funding, or are you actually using existing resources, your staff? but this is a great way to demonstrate how you have supported your children and young people. But also, it shows the engagement principles of using pupil voice. This is how I feel when I came to school. And can you imagine if we take these home and a child is able to talk to their parent and carer and say, this is how I feel. They may not have even shared that with their parents. And this is what I did. And actually, if they are isolated, there are little activities there they can still do at home. I did this and felt better at school. Can I do this at home? And there is a plethora of resources out there. And I know, you know, This Is Your Way, This Is PE, the stuff Sport England are piloting, which will come out hopefully next year, the stuff the Active Partnerships have done, as well as other partners. There's some great stuff they can use at home. And then you've got the Oak Academy stuff that will go live in January as well. So by using these sort of posters, whether you create your own or you use ours or someone else's, it just demonstrates externally and to your senior leadership team what you can do through PESPA to keep children physically active and emotionally well. Please may I have the next slide. So how are we going to plan this high quality curriculum? Using those two posters or your own self-review, it needs to be about what your children and young people need to ensure that they are re-engaged, they are physically well, emotionally well, socially well, and that impacts on the cognitive experiences as well. Now, we also know that there's a great deal of pressure to catch up. But irrefutably, the research shows unless children are physically and emotionally well, they will not actually absorb any other type of cognitive information. We know that. We knew that before this happened. So it's important we get that balance right. We get the needs base. And it is lovely to see some heads who have said it's PE every day. We're having extra drama, extra art. That is really helpful to get those young children on a baseline, balanced way of approaching their learning. Because if not, we're going to see increased deterioration in behaviour. So what we do need to do is explain a myth. All activities can be taught. We do not have a sport curriculum. We have a physical education curriculum. You teach activities through the physical domain. You also use particular sports to do this, but you don't actually, in primary, say, okay, it's basketball. What you might have is lots of throwing into hoops. You may have throwing and catching. What is that actually serving? That is about giving them the skills. So later on, they are able to play netball, to play cricket, to throw a rugby ball, etc. So all activities can be taught in that particular context. Now, what is difficult is the swimming element, because if you've got an external pool, you cannot go. We have had confirmation yesterday from Swim England. We have a state school with its own pool. That classroom can be used during curriculum time. Now, it's not going to be ideal, but we do not, as I've said, want a curriculum 19, COVID-19 curriculum. We want, what you've got to do is plan for that ideal and then adapt it with the constraints that you're working under. Now, if your senior leadership team are on board and they know the challenges you've got, and we can report to governors, we hope you'll get a lot more support. We know, particularly in secondary schools, your facilities are being used as extra classrooms to give more space. Now, as the weather becomes more inclement, how are we going to manage that? Saw a fantastic, innovative piece of action from a primary school. They asked if they could buy 250 ponchos from Poundland, which they did. And yeah, okay, it's £1 each, but it just enables those children to still come to school in their PE kit, put the poncho on. They can be taken home and wiped down, and they can be used at home as well. And we thought that was actually quite an innovative way of getting outside when it's raining and showery, and they can actually not have to sit in wet kit because they did not have any space to get children changed. Others have more space, and as I said, it depends on the context in which you're working that we have to find innovative solutions. And really what is important is we cannot replace PE, physical activity. We can't just say we're just going to go out and walk today, because that education through that physical domain, that cognitive, social and emotional, is not going to be addressed. We must do physical activity, that is absolutely critical, but we also need the PE and, where possible, the school sport. Now, could I have the next slide, please, Simon? These were the top 5 questions we had from 7:30 Sunday morning through till close of play on Monday night, which actually was 11 o'clock. So we've had quite a lot, and we've had a lot more as well that are different. Now, as I said on the slide with the person looking and seeing a 6 and the other one looking a 9, it is about different perceptions. We're about physical education. Jayne is going to come on later and we'll talk to you obviously about sport and the NGBs, I'm sure. But what we hope to have is questions like yes or no. Now, can we run the extracurricular clubs and activities has really, really challenged people, because they're saying no inter-school fixtures. So if you want your teams to practice, how do you do that? If it's wraparound care and for vulnerable children, and it's all about whether or not parents need that care because they're out looking for a job, or they're in education and training, or they can't do the job, almost the frontline workers, then you can run extracurricular activities. But one would hope whether it's yes or no, and people have been extremely creative in how they've managed to do that and plan going forward. The problem we've researched this, to right through the legal system, is we do not have any case law, and case law is where there's a precedent set. Statute law is where the law is quite clear and set in statute. We don't have any of this for COVID-19. We have principles about whether or not it was case law, children should be in school if they've got head lice. Yes, they should. Whether or not they should be doing PE bare feet if they've got verrucas, or go swimming or do gymnastics or dancing bare feet. So there are all sorts of loose bits of case law we can refer to, but nothing concrete. And our job at afPE is to put the best interest of the workforce, the children and the subject first. So what we're trying to do is keep everybody safe while keeping as much physical activity, PE and school sport on that timetable, and in extracurricular and wraparound and preschool and lunch, because we need that. We know it is in the best interest of all children and young people, and without it, we feel there could be a real downturn, further downturn, in fact, of children's health and well-being. So can we still operate fixtures? That is an easy one. No, that is a no, which is great, because that's straight down the line. There's no misinterpretation there. What can we teach within physical education? Now, this is one that's caused a lot of challenges, because obviously NGB put out their advice, and their advice is about recreational settings, as well as, for example, the FA advice, very clear, no football fixtures. And then someone rang up and said, well, can I do football in the curriculum? Remember, this is physical education where you do football activities. If you choose to do an invasion game, which involves a football, and you are doing the skills, knowledge and understanding around that physical activity, and your risk assessment is safe, then that is okay to do that within your curriculum physical education. It's the context in which you operate, and whether or not your employer and their principles around safe practice and risk assessment for that activity are fit for purpose. And then, can schools access local leisure and sports facilities? Well, that's a real challenge. And again, have a look at our guidance, because if it's separate and it's closed, you cannot go in without the appropriate staff levels. Now, if you're in a community school, which I was in, the last school I was in, those facilities belong to us from 9 till 4. And so we use them. But unless you've got external staff to support you, you can't go into sort of almost a ghost town. And then you've got all the travel issues to get there, whether it be walking or on a coach. So, that is a difficult one. If your leisure centre is closed, it is closed. And then we have, can schools teach PE? Sorry, I've got, yes, you can teach PE indoors. That's not a problem. If you think about it, if you've got 30 children in a classroom, most halls, sports facilities are larger than your average classroom. So if you're doing dance, which was in music, dance and drama were clearly articulated in the government guidance, we thought that was really, really simple and clear. Of course you can. But it's about those social distancing, your risk assessment, your hand sanitizer, your hand hygiene. It's about all of those things being in place. It's a whole school approach. Okay, Simon, could I have the next ones, please? Now, I know this is for primary colleagues, but there's something in here for secondary which may help you as well. I'm not going to go into great detail because Tim is going to do a workshop on this later. But this is the new template to be completed in 2 parts. In March for your carryover, your underspend, if you have any, and then in July for this year's funding. But just notice the front, it is a different cover. Don't go and fill in the old one. It's not mandatory, but you are advised when you publish to have some kind of format. So this template was put together by the Association for PE, Youth Sport Trust, and we were supported by Active Partnerships. So it's a real collective and we're all consistent with our advice on this. The next slide just shows you how you have to look at your underspend and how you must report. Can you put the next slide up, please, Simon? Thank you. So it's quite simple, but you must report on this by March. That is absolutely critical. And the next slide as well, if you put that one up, shows the intent, implementation and impact. Now, I think that's really important, something colleagues in secondary schools might want to use. It's very simple and you can adapt this because it clearly shows how your intent in physical education mirrors your intent in school. And remember, the new Ofsted framework is about telling the school story. It's about showing that you've got a progressive curriculum. And here you can show this is the intent and this replicates the intent of the whole school. This is how we have done it or are going to do it. And this is the difference we've made. And remember, whenever you talk about impact, it's not about the teachers. It's about the difference it's made to children and young people. So if you say 15 of our colleagues have been on a first aid course, you know, the question you have to ask yourself is, so what? You know, so what? If you're going to put 15 teachers have been on the course, you need to follow it with, as a result, the difference it's made to children and young people is that we have zilch, nothing, no accidents at all in our school. If it's about we have actually put our teachers on a swimming course, we've had a 30% increase in progress levels in our children who can swim 25 metres. So always make sure it refers back to the children and young people. And as I say, I'm not going to go into detail because Tim will do that. And the next one, please, Simon. Now, this was the brainchild of Dan Wilson in Yorkshire Sport. And he said, do we need some clear top tips? And I know a lot of us don't like top tips or something like that, but this is actually a really useful document. And, you know, we all thought, yeah, we've got to support this. And Dan came to afPE and asked, can you have a look at this? Which we did, and we've all put into it. And then we've used other partners. So Active Partnerships, afPE and YST have all got behind this because we see these 7 principles could help all schools, whether it's primary or secondary. And what it talks about is sustainability, whole school improvement and outdoor learning. And that is a really, really effective way of using your primary P spend. It may be a way you use your Sport England secondary teacher training money if you're involved in that. And if we move forward to the next one, it talks about active travel, high quality physical education, and then one I really want to focus on because Tim has raised this, and that is about innovation. You are the most creative of our workforce, the teaching workforce. Teachers of physical education come up with all sorts of ideas. You know, you are the people they go to if they need to organise big events because you are creative, you can see the bigger picture. You always have health and safety at the forefront. And really the innovation here is how best to use your money locally. That is absolutely critical to have the best impact for your young people. And then last but not least is the swimming element of it. Now, there are lots of theories about whether or not intelligence is something that is inherited or whether or not it's something you can build on. I actually believe in the latter. And at afPE, we really do believe in the nurture side. And we're asking you, as our teachers out there, to make that difference, to make sure your children are physically and emotionally well, because that is what will impact on long-term cognitive development and make our young people the ones that everyone wants to employ, that the best citizens. Okay, Simon, thank you. So Tim asked me to leave some tangible points. You know, I never do as I'm told, so there's quite a few there, but I can actually say, Tim, there are really two, and it's about the repositioning of PE, and its second one is its impact. You know, what we'd like you to do is think about what your parents and senior leaders say. They put emotional health as a key priority. Well, if that is the case, then part of that is advocating, let's have PE at the heart of the curriculum. Let's make sure that we have increased physical education, not the same or a decrease. Always demonstrate that inextricable link between those four elements: physical, emotional, cognitive and social. Use your head, hands poster, put it up in the school. And Professor Greery has some research, which I'm probably not going to do justice to, but very simply, there are two elements to it. One, if the physical environment is right, lots of play and opportunities, and one, if they are active and they can actually be able to link between physical and emotional. Now, what better subject to do that? We had a bit of stick actually to say, somebody had actually said, is it not an academic subject? I will take that we have an impact on all 10 other subjects because of what we do in PE. And I actually think that makes us an academic subject as well. And we also need to sort of use all the different intelligences, the emotional intelligence, the physical intelligence. You know, all of these matter to our young people if they're going to have the best outcomes when they leave year 6 or year 11 or whatever the next chapter is. And what I'd like to play, I'd like to finish with this little video. Some of you may have seen it before, but if you could play this in your school, it gives those messages to the community, to parents, to our governors, to say, you know, PE is for life. Now, to try and tell that to a 5-year-old, 7-year-old teenager is a whole different thing. So Simon, could you just play the little clip from the video for me, please? Oh, Simon, are you there? Thank you. There's no noise on that. There's no volume. Sorry about this. Just look at this for a throw. Simon, we don't have any volume. Okay, well, I'm sorry about not having any volume there, but what that shows is these are life skills that go on right the way through from cradle to grave. And part of our task force is looking at this. You know, how can we get over to young people that actually when you're an adult, these really matter? And I think I shared with some of the primary colleagues, when I was in the spinal unit and I fell, one of the reasons that I ended up being able to walk again was because of that core. Now, you know, I'm not in the spring of my youth, but under that visceral menopausal fat was still some core that they were able to build up. And that's really important. And, you know, when we play this to young people, they say, that's my aunt, that's my granddad, that's somebody I know. You know, the key one is a classic where people duck and don't want to catch things for all sorts of reasons. So it's really important that we actually demonstrate how important PE is going forward, whether it's early years or whether it's your later years, it makes a difference. And it's all set in the context of teaching safety and teaching safely. So thank you for listening. I do hope if you've got any questions, you'll put them through and we'll be able to answer them. And back to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Sue. I really appreciate that. And great for you to join us. And as I said at the very start, especially with the week you've had at afPE as well. I just want to recap some points in there from Sue. I think she kicked off by saying we are part of the solution, and she's so right that we are part of this solution. It was really good to hear some clarity and some confidence from yourself and from afPE, and I think we need as much clarity and confidence as we can at the moment. And that really that message at the end about those really strong arguments that we've got to, and how we reposition PE in school sport at this time to support those arguments. If you're not a member of afPE, I really suggest you become a member. The resources and everything that they've got at afPE are amazing, and that's something that can definitely help you with those arguments as we look to reposition PE in school sport at the moment. And again, I'll make sure there's links. You can go on their website and you can get links to afPE there to become a member as we move on. So thank you very much, Sue. Sorry that volume didn't work on the video. What we will do is I'll get the link to that video circulated, and I'll get that put into the chat from this, so everybody's just on YouTube, you can get that video. And as Sue said, what a great video to play at your school, whole staff meetings or something like that. I think that would be really, really good. So as I said,
we'll send the posters over, Tim, to you, so you can put those up on your site as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sue. Okay, so as questions go, we're going to go. I'm just sharing my screen again. Give me 2 seconds. So maybe everyone can see my screen again. That's come back up. And we're going to move straight on with our second. So huge thank you to Sue, as I said, to our second keynote speaker. And I think, and I may be wrong, Jayne, I think this might be one of the first times you've spoken in Cornwall and come down, and well, not come down, virtually come down and spoken to us down here. So it is absolutely great to have the Director of Children and Young People from Sport England, Jayne Molyneux, at our virtual conference this year. And especially because where Sport England are at the moment, obviously there's a lot going on, and all the guidance and everything that's coming out this last week. But Sport England are also in a process of writing their new strategy. So I think it's a great time to have Jayne in Cornwall listening to us, and how they move on from their the previous strategy into their new one. And also Jayne's position. Jayne sits, she was telling me this week how she sits on the government's return to play group and the work that they're doing at the moment. So again, great to have Jayne on with us this morning, and hopefully Jayne is there. I'm going to share my screen with Jayne's presentation. So there we go, Jayne.
Thanks, Tim. And are you going to be my able assistant and as in do that next slide, please? Are you able to do that for me?
You're Chris Whitty. Your next slide, please, definitely.
That's fantastic. And I'll be Jenny, the deputy CMO. So as Tim said, you know, thank you for inviting me to speak at your virtual conference today. And you know, I was really looking forward to coming down. Those of you who know England will probably pick up that I'm not London based, so I live actually in the northwest in Lancashire. So I'm sure some of you sitting there going, you're to blame the fact that we're in this lockdown now because you're in tier 3. So you know, personally not, but it is what it is, and we need to try and move out of it as quick as we can. So let's move on quite quickly. I mean, it's interesting having virtual conferences because, you know, what you do miss is the opportunity beforehand is to have a coffee and catch up with colleagues that you haven't seen for a while, and that networking. I always find it quite bizarre that we're all sitting in silence waiting to either be admitted to the, you know, we're waiting in the lobby or waiting for a conference to start. So, and sadly, I think this is going to be sort of the norm for a while now. And we were laughing with colleagues in Sport England to say, when we go back to face-to-face meetings, does that mean we're all going to finish with a wave at the end of the meeting, which we all seem to do on Teams now? So Anyway, yeah, I just obviously just wanted to thank you all. So for the next 30 minutes or so, Tim, do you want to move on to the next slide? I'm just going to build on exactly what Sue said, really, because I think it would be amiss for not to personally thank you all from everybody at Sport England for the work that you do. As a former teacher and chair of secondary school, chair of governors at a secondary school, you know, life was pretty hard at times, and I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it's been for you all since March. It continues to be, and when I wrote this presentation, I said, as in, I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and certainly we're not out of the woods. In fact, we're probably in the middle of a little bit of a forest for the next week or so. And as Sue said, you know, yes, I'm going to talk about the importance of PE, school sport, physical activity and play for all of our children, young people. But just building on Sue said, it's really important for all of our mental well-being. You know, it is incredibly difficult. So please look after yourself. You know, in my time at Sport England, I've never known anything like it. I'm extremely grateful to be in a job. But my goodness me, it's just absolutely relentless. And that's just me. I'm not even in a school. So again, just thank you. I also, again, building on from Tim's earlier keynote, is just to highlight a couple of the great examples about how we've all worked together. And if we think about, you know, the lockdown that we had back in March now, about that community spirit, you know, I remember as on Thursday, you know, banging my pot and pan to thank the NHS. I'm not sure that'll happen now, but it was great to see the community coming together. And if you think about, you know, you as the community that looks at PE, school sport, physical activity and play in Cornwall, you know, some of the great examples about how you've come together. So obviously, as Tim said, you had your first ever virtual Cornwall School Games, engaging over 10,000 young people across the whole of Cornwall. I know that's no mean feat, given obviously, you know, how big Cornwall is in terms of the rurality, you know, of you as a county. So, I mean, that's just phenomenal. And obviously I can see again, Tim, I'm not sure whether you're going to go ahead with it, but I think next week your winter school games was planned. So again, if that's going ahead, you know, chance to do it virtually, and obviously some of the challenge cards, obviously, that I saw on the Active Partnerships website. I also wanted to thank the 4 school games organisers in terms of the response that, you know, again, a real great network that we work with the Youth Sport Trust and everybody invest in, how you responded to the first lockdown in terms of very quickly manoeuvred to say, right, we're not going to do face-to-face now, we're going to do lots of virtual activity. So it was just fantastic that the work that you did from March onwards and continue to do. So yeah, that was just before I started in terms of the main part of my presentation. I just thought it was really, really important to thank each and every one of you. I can see there's nearly 100 people on this, you know, this call today. And obviously you're representing lots of people in your schools and your children, young people, you know, and even your families at home. So I just thought I had to start off by saying that. Okay, Tim, if you want to move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what I'm going to do and unpick for the rest of the time is to look at the impact of COVID on the physical activity of children, young people, and obviously predominantly young people aged 5 to 16. But I think on the call we might have some early years providers, and that impact will be the same for under 5s, and equally if you're working with, you know, young people over the age of 16, equally the impact. Just for ease, rather than every time I say children, young people, I'm just going to use the word children, but obviously, you know, I mean that age span. So what I'm going to look in terms of, you know, what impact has been on activity levels. What does that mean for that physical literacy and enjoyment? You know, have we seen an impact on that? Start to unpick about the real important role that schools can play in terms of our activity levels of children, and then finish off with a bit of a how we can all work together to address some of the challenges that we face now, and I think we'll continue to face till at least the spring. Okay, Tim, in terms of next slide, please. So Tim's already talked around this. So December last year, we obviously produced our Active Lives Children Young People survey. It is the largest survey of its kind in the world. Survey 130,000 children, young people in England. These are the national statistics. So you can see, obviously, they're measured against the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines, about an average of 60 minutes or more a day. And what we started to see in December last year is some real positive increases in terms of an increase of the numbers of children who are active, and that's obviously meeting the average of 60 minutes or more a day, and a decrease in the numbers of children who are less active. So real positive shoots. And Tim said, you know, for Cornwall, you know, for both areas, you're actually above the national average. So absolutely fantastic, and well done to everybody who's played a part in that. So, you know, in terms of nearly 51% of children in Cornwall were active, you know, well above the national average. And, you know, 24.7% were less active. So again, above the national average. It's still quite humbling, you know, if you think, as in, you know, still over a quarter of children, young people nationally are doing less than an average of 30 minutes a day. And there's a lot to do there. As Tim said earlier, our results for next year, obviously for the past academic year, so the academic year 1920, will be published on Thursday, the 3rd of December. They'll be published at 9:30. We can't release them any earlier because they are published under ONS rules. So again, imminently, and no surprises. I think we're going to have pretty sobering results. Perfectly understandable, because from March everything locked down. So yeah, so that is coming up in terms of the results this year. So please do look out for that. Okay, Tim, next slide. So let's have a look at the activity levels under COVID, and let's move on in terms of what that's showing us in terms of activity levels under lockdown. No surprises. Activity levels have declined in lockdown, and I suspect, as in, you know, whilst you as schools are still open and will be able to offer opportunities for your children, it still will find for some children who aren't, well, I don't think any child is getting anything outside of school. It's going to go down again. Interesting though, the vast majority have said they during lockdown, they were doing something to stay active, which actually is quite pleasing, 9 out of 10. But chances are there weren't many of them. As you can see, there was only literally 19% at the time we did the survey, which was in May, that were actually doing enough to meet the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines. So again, we went from nearly 47%, which was highlighted in the Active Live survey, down to only 19%. And again, if you look at the other end, about less active, doing less than 30 minutes a day, you can see that there were 43%, so nearly half of our children were actually doing less than 30 minutes. And again, there are absolutely no surprises. There were some interesting findings in activity, which I'll come on to later, about actually some groups of children were actually doing a little bit more of activity whilst we're in lockdown. Certainly nowhere near enough to meet that the average minute of 60 minutes a day. But there are some interesting shoots which challenges us all, and those of us in Sport England as well, about what is it about the offer then that actually, whilst they were in lockdown, that they were either stuck at home or just going out once a day for their daily exercise, that encouraged them to do more activity? And can we build on some of those interesting findings as we go forward from now and in the future? And I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Okay, Tim, next slide. So I talked about in terms of their physical literacy, and I just thought it was worth just reminding everybody what we mean by physical literacy. So the next slide just reminds us all about the definition of physical literacy, and it's the one we use in our Active Live survey. It's the definition from the International Physical Literacy Association, so the IPLA, and you can see that it has 5 components. So competence, understanding, enjoyment, confidence, and knowledge. I've said we use this in the Active Live survey when we ask the children that take part, we ask them statements pertaining to each of those attitudes. The statements have all been cognitive tested when we're piloting the survey, so children really understand what we're asking. And what we do is, through each of the statements that you can actually see the questions underneath. So for competencies, I find sport easy. For children years 1 to 2, and then for children years 3 to 11, it's like, I find exercise and sport easy. And we ask them how strongly they agree to those statements. So we ask 5 questions for children in secondary school, but for those in years 3 to 6, we only ask 4 questions. So there is one that is missing, which is the one around sort of to knowledge. And that's just because how we've cognitive tested about young children and their grasp of understanding that level of questioning. So let's just again move on to the next slide in terms of the results that again came out of last year's Active Live survey. And what it told us that, physically literate children are more active, they're more happier, so they have increased levels of mental well-being, and they're more resilient and trusting of other children. So again, I talked around in terms of the questions about strongly agreeing. We know that the more positive attitudes that a child strongly agrees to, the more active they're likely to be. So again, if I just highlight the top one, is that, if a child agrees that they strongly agree to 4 positive attitudes, of those 63% are likely to fall in the active category. And it's no surprises, obviously, there is a sliding scale that, if they don't strongly agree to any of those statements, you can see as quite, there are only 31% of those active. And clearly, obviously, the biggest driver of activity levels is enjoyment. So those young people who say that they strongly agree to, they enjoy taking part in sport, actually do 33% more minutes of activity than those that don't. And again, if you look at happiness and obviously mental well-being, which is really, really important for our young people now, probably more so than ever, again, we can see that, if they're physically literate, if they agree to more of those statements, they are more likely to be happier. Again, we ask a question in the survey about how happy you are. Just a slight aside, it's an interesting one. We talk about children, young people and how they're feeling at the moment. For this year's survey, actually for last year's survey, we've included a question on loneliness for the first time. Again, proper ONS question. So we'll have the first results of those in December. And again, because of when we went into lockdown, we'll be able to separate in terms of what was loneliness like for our children when we went into lockdown. So that will be interesting to see, and pretty, again, quite sobering that for some of our children, when schools closed and everything stopped in September, they were pretty lonely. And it's just quite humbling in terms of some of the challenges that we've all faced in terms of the situation we find ourselves in. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is look at in terms of the motivations and barriers to being active. Now, some of the ones I'm going to highlight will ring true in all of the things we do, but they're particularly more relevant now. And we asked lots of children about what are the motivators, why have you continued to be active? So if we look at sort of the next slide, there are probably 5 key elements that children told us during lockdown and just coming out in terms of why they were active. I was actually really pleased to see that I enjoy it was number 1, because obviously that then rings true with what we're seeing about physically literate children and about enjoyment being the biggest driver of activity. So it's good that kids are saying, as in, it's great to be outside. Interesting, some of them said, I liked it because I can choose what I want to do. I'm having fun and I'm expending my energy. So interesting to choose. And if you remember early in my presentation, I talked around, we saw some green shoots of some groups of children saying they've actually been more active. And that was particularly relevant for girls and some children from some Black and minority ethnic groups. So it has a question about what is it about girls' activity that they were doing a little bit more, certainly not enough to be active, don't get me wrong. But was it more around, they were able to choose activity. It was, they weren't being judged. They could pick their kit. They could do what they want at a time that they wanted. It's just interesting. And obviously, it rings true with a lot of our research we've done about women's activity, and obviously our campaign about This Girl Can, about the fear of judgment. But anyway, so that's about enjoyment. Interestingly, the number one reason was that they'd noticed that how good it was for their health and well-being. And it was great to hear that from children themselves, that, you know, they actually noticed that the more active they were, it was really good for my well-being and really good for my health. You know, interestingly, as in, they still liked that sense of achievement. They wanted to try new things. They wanted to master a skill. And I think, you know, there were lots of things I saw on YouTube about try this skill, try that skill. But on the flip side of that, some of the children told us they liked skills, but after a while, they actually got quite bored of it. So you'll know, and those of you who've got children, is some of them have quite a short attention span. So it's how do you make sure that if you're going to focus on skills, how do you keep changing that regularly so they don't get bored? Because they did tell us that they got bored of it after a while. Family, no surprises. You know, the role of the family for when we were locked down and possibly now will become increasingly important for some groups of children. You know, as in during lockdown, you know, I think 71% of children said that they did their activity with their family. So from us at Sport England, as we sort of go into the next stage, we'll be doing lots of work about encouraging, you know, activity within the family. And interestingly, some kids, no surprise, said, well, there's not much else to do. We're always going to get that, as in it alleviates the boredom. I've got nothing better to do. It's the only way I can meet up with my friends, you know, whether it's online or not, and it give a reason to get out of the house when there's nothing else to do. So it's interesting that they say, you know, we've done it because we ain't got anything else to do. We also asked them in terms of what actually had stopped them from being physically active. So the next slide obviously looks at sort of 5 key areas. Now, in terms of some of these ones, it's going to stop them being physically active outside of school, you know, the restrictions that we went into yesterday. But I'm being optimistic and hope that, you know, from the 2nd of December, we will move into the tiered system that we went into before lockdown. And what we're doing certainly at Sport England is making sure that when we come out of this lockdown, is that we can do as much as we can to make sure that those opportunities are available when we come out of this lockdown on the 2nd of December. So again, children have said is that, you know, my usual clubs and classes haven't been running, and that is going to happen now for out of school activities. They said we don't have the place or the space to be active. You know, for them, they don't have space at home because they live in, you know, apartments or flats, and obviously the leisure centre gym and pool is closed, which it is going to be closed now. There are still some who worry about the virus and whether that is going to increase now. You know, their parents and carers have been worried and said, you're not going to go out because I'm worried that you're going to get it. You know, that was certainly in March. And I think possibly with the figures now, that may go up again now. Quite humbling again, I talked about loneliness. Some children said is, I don't have anybody to play with. And again, it comes down to, you know, schools being so important for some children who, you know, live on their own. You know, the parents and carers are too busy with whatever is going on in their life. They don't have the opportunity for online activities. And again, they just had nobody to play with. Again, you know, there was one girl said to us that during lockdown, because her mum was a frontline worker, she actually went to live with her auntie, who and one of her cousins. And she said it was absolutely brilliant because she had somebody to play with. And then as the restrictions started to be eased, obviously she moved back to live home with mum. You know, mum was still a frontline worker, and she went back to being quite lonely because she missed the opportunity to play with, you know, to play with cousins. So again, it was quite sort of sobering for me. And again, no surprises, as in there are some children who say, I actually don't feel like it. I haven't got the purpose, energy or motivation. I actually don't enjoy it. Interesting, some say I'm not fit enough. Interesting about perception, and I've got better things to do. So there are some that don't feel like it. And again, as in, I'm sure some of you who teach PE will still get some of your children who I don't feel like it and I'm not going to do it. I can speak as a former PE teacher with experience. But again, it's really, really important for our children to be active. So in terms of the next one about, you know, the ongoing problem, you know, the closure of so much provision is still going to be problematic when we come out of this lockdown. And obviously, I know, you know, you all work in schools, but I'm just thought it's really important that community provision from us, for those of us who work in the community, is actually critical, you know, in terms of keeping children, young people active. And obviously those stats in terms of, you know, present in terms of why kids weren't active in lockdown. So I've just talked around when we come out of this restriction about we need to try and get as much open as possible. What can we do to support people to make sure that we allow children who want to take part, they are able to? So the next slide unpicks it a bit more around, why is it? What are the challenges about why are things closed? So there are three elements. So if we skip on to the next slide. So I've picked on three. There's probably lots of reasons. So the first one, and I'm smiling because people are saying it's difficult to follow the guidelines. And if I could see Sue with her webcam, she'd probably be nodding vigorously. Probably like afPE and Sport England, we have probably spent, well, we seem to spend every day trying to unpick the guidelines, trying to work with government to try and get them to clarify, change the guidelines, then trying to unpick the FAQs that we get to interpret for, everybody working in sport. Anyway, let's move on. But, that is something we need to do. And we've got to keep working about, trying to make the guidelines as simple as possible. We're still getting told that venues are no longer available, obviously pre-Thursday. And I've picked about schools and obviously it's not just schools, some leisure centres are not offering their facilities due to concerns, but equally due to the pressures that you're all facing in schools. You're worried about the students in your schools, that the pupils, they are your priority. And as in, whilst it's great to open up your facilities, it's not quite at the top of your list at the moment. Some of you may be aware that what we're doing is, you might have had a letter from me, obviously Kate has come from EdComs, is we're surveying all schools in England, primary and secondary, actually, and FE and HE, to try and understand, as in, have you opened up your facilities? Have you done any after school clubs? If not, what are the challenges? Why not? And what extra support you need? So when we've got that in, we'll have a look at it and see if there's any extra support that we can give, obviously, schools around opening up their facilities for community use. And then obviously we'll feed the information into the Department for Education, who we're working with, about what are the challenges about after school activities, extracurricular, what support can we give? So, if you get the survey in your schools, I think it's going out today, if not Monday. Please do fill it in. I'm led to believe it takes 7 or 8 minutes, no more. But if we give that as much as information as possible, it gives us that national picture, but also the local picture about what are the challenges schools are facing, what are the challenges FE is facing, and obviously universities. And obviously the last one is about there aren't enough people to deliver the sessions, and no surprisingly, volunteers have understandably not returned for a whole host of reasons. It could be because of personal circumstances, whatever job they do, and also they're nervous. We also know there's a lot of burden being put on volunteers in community sport about, they've got to be COVID champions and they've got to do lots of checks to make sure venues are COVID secure, that clubs are COVID secure. So we know that, and again, through our work with Club Matters, is what can we do to support volunteers, as we start to ease out of restrictions. So finally, probably for the last bit, I'm just going to look at the role of the school in terms of how, in terms of what can we do. So if we look in terms of sort of the next slide about the three elements about the role of school. So I've touched on this about some groups of children rely so much on school provision more than others. And I'm trying to think as in pre-Thursday now, and obviously post the 2nd of December. I've talked around teenage girls, those from less affluent families and some from Black and Asian backgrounds. They've said to us they're more likely to get their activity at school. So it's really, really important in terms of whatever we can do collectively to make sure those groups, indeed all groups of children, young people now are active. Again, because of all challenges that you face is, schools are not offering as many opportunities to be active as usual. As Sue has said, physical education is the key. All schools, it is statutory, everybody has to deliver physical education. So, when we hear that some schools are offering no PE or have reduced the time, as in, I'm not really going to comment on it, but it's really, really important, in terms of physical education. And again, schools are offering, none or no extracurricular. Interesting, as I saw on the chat earlier when Sue was talking about extracurricular, and obviously if you read the DFE guidelines in terms of what isn't allowed, obviously it is, around childcare. And obviously I'm not going to say, but obviously somebody's put in the chat in terms of, how they've looked in terms of, making sure that extracurricular opportunities are offered for the children in terms of, how they've been able to make sure that that is still being offered. So there is a bit of a solution in the chat that somebody's put down, obviously based on Sue's presentation. And obviously as we come out of lockdown, many children will still find it hard to stay active. And you can see that last year, obviously 39% obviously are doing less sport and exercise at school than last year. So it's still a big challenge for us. So finally, in terms of moving forward, so I'm just about running out of time. Looks like I'm going to be spot on it. In terms of what can we all collectively do to work together in terms of focusing on. So I've just got sort of 4 takeaways that we can look at. And obviously we're working on this at Sport England as well. So the next slide obviously looks at, in terms of what we need to do is continue to highlight the benefits of being active. If you think about the Active Lives survey about, children who are active are more happier, more resilient, more trusting. We know it helps them with their schoolwork. So, continue to highlight it to our leaders in schools, our governors. It is really important. It's important also, all the time, but probably more so now. Let's try and work together about creating, more better opportunities. And I know lots of you will be doing this anyway, but again, look at, there's 3 examples I've given there, but there's lots. There's some of the things I think Sue talked about, some really simple things that we can do. We need to focus, working with you about, when we come, from the 2nd of December, I'm keeping my fingers crossed about the reopening of provision outside of school. And obviously it does include those of you who do let your facilities for community use. So, we need to try and help you as much as possible. And then more importantly, for everybody, it's giving that reassurance. We need to work with providers to think, okay, what are the key concerns? What reassurance do we need? Keep sharing examples of where children have tried new things in new ways for the first time and actually realizing how much they like it. I mean, if you think about the opening clip that Tim showed, which I've seen before, about, something simple about, somebody on the drive created that, that little bit of a track. It did make me smile. The child, when it first went down, he stopped and looked as if to say, oh, I've not seen this before. And then he quite liked it. And it's just something really simple. So, it's just to provide that reassurance. Finally, as Sue said, as in, physical activity, PE, school sport and play is so important. Sue showed the clip as to, why it is really important for the whole reasons that, has been set out previously. I do smile and think, perhaps I didn't work as hard as on my core skills and others, because I certainly can't leap over fences anymore. And I do struggle with my shopping. And I do remember why people say you need to work on your core. But again, it just highlights why it is so important. Finally, Tim did talk about our strategy, and we'll be launching that in January. We are setting out a 10-year vision strategy. And it's interesting, Tim's slides had, the sort of infographic from the Chief Medical Officer about, being stronger and moving more. And that is almost going to be the mantra of our strategy, is when we move, we are stronger. So it's building on that. We're going to have 5 key priorities, and positive attitudes for children and young people is one of our key priorities. So it's great that that's in there. So you'll hear more of that in January. So that's it for me. So my final slide is, again, just a big thank you for listening to me today. I'm so sorry I wasn't with you today, but maybe Tim and everybody, if we come out of it and we're not having virtual conferences this time next year, maybe great to come down again and hear and see some of the work you're doing in Cornwall. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jayne. Really appreciated. And just a couple of points that came from me there, really, just that you started off, you mentioned something about the importance of play. I think that's really important. Enjoyment being the biggest driver of activity. We keep talking about that, and we just think all the time we need to make sure that enjoyment is central to everything that we're looking to do to raise the levels of activity for children. And if I can encourage as many schools in Cornwall as possible to return to that survey about the school facilities, and again, if we can support that at Active Cornwall, we will do, to try and to try and make sure we get a good response from Cornwall, because I know we can get some local data back from that as well, which would be great. Just from me, we're just going to try something that's for just before we move on to the planned Q&A panel. If everybody could just unmute their mics. At this time, especially with what's happened this week and lockdown 2.0 yesterday, just a big round of applause for Jayne and Sue. It's really, really appreciated. So if you could just really do appreciate it, both of you, and I know how incredibly busy you are. So to take the time out for Cornwall as well is huge. So thanks a lot. We've got a Q&A panel now. I know there's some questions in the chat, and I've just been looking at that. It looks like Sue really appreciated. Thank you for answering some of those questions in there, which is good. And a lot of still confusion around indoors and outdoors. So I think it looks like they're being answered within the chat, and they may come up in the questions that we've got later as well. And it's what's also great as well, and I really appreciate it's great to see some colleagues also responding in the chat and sharing some practice. I think we really are as strong as how we all are together. So if collectively we can support where we are at the moment in this pandemic is great. So great to see some colleagues responding and sharing some practice within that. And later on this afternoon, I know we've got some primary school and secondary school sharing practice sessions. So our chair, Richard Higginson, was going to host this session, but as you know, Higgy's not with us, so I will just host a Q&A that we've got. We've got Sue and Jayne, and we're also, they're going to be joined, they're on the call, Chris Cause, who is our development manager from the Youth Sport Trust. And also we wanted to give that local angle as well. So Dan Lugg put himself forward as one of our Cornwall School Games organisers, so a huge thank you to Dan for coming forward as well. The questions that were sent, you're going to get to see these questions, but if there's any additional questions, please make sure you put them on the chat function, and I'll try and pick them up as we go from there. We're going to make sure everyone gets away on time, so if we don't get to answer all of these questions, then we will we'll definitely get them answered by our guests, and then we can respond to them in the post-conference information as we move forward. So some of this may be answered. I think the first one's here for you, Sue, that came in around this COVID-specific curriculum, and I know you kind of talked about this in your presentation. Is there anything more you want to add to that question one, Sue?
No, just really that, you've done a really good job on your risk assessments in Cornwall, and as long as they're placed in class bubbles and the interaction between other classes is minimised as far as really practical, outdoor sports and activities would be the priority. It's in the chat, but the distancing guidelines based on the age and ability of the pupils and the feasibility have just got to be followed. But it does mean you can be indoors because the spaces are bigger than your normal classroom.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And I know there's some comments in the chat around that as well, so that's really good. Jayne, I think this one is probably best for you around what does the future of the PE and School Sport Premium look like? What can we do in Cornwall to help it continue?
Thanks, Tim. I mean, it's an interesting question now, and clearly if I have somebody from the Department for Education on the call, I would be giving them a rugby pass to say, off you go, answer it. So in terms of the future, I mean, first of all, it's great that we have it for this academic year. It's fantastic that we've been able to carry over any underspend. I suppose in terms of the future, I mean, if I was honest, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. The Chancellor, if you follow that, will know that he's announced a one-year spending review. Completely understandable because of everything with COVID and the resources that are needed for that. But what I will say you all in terms of what you can do to help for it to continue is, if you think about Sue's presentation, is demonstrate the impact that it has had on your students. So Sue obviously talked around some of the fantastic resources that are out there. Obviously Sue shared the template that's been obviously developed in partnership with afPE, with the Youth Sport Trust, with Active Partnerships Network. That is the key thing. In essence, yes, you can see in your, the impact it's had on your students, but in essence, your shop window to demonstrate that impact is getting that on your school's website. People in the Department for Education, if they're looking in terms of the impact, don't have time, obviously, to visit, the 20 odd thousand primary schools. If you can demonstrate the impact on your website of what it's made to the difference of your students, we can see that as national partners, we can continue to basically lobby and say, look at the impact it's made for your students. So that's all I can say to you is, look at the great resources that are out there. Sue shared with you, and obviously I think Tim, Sue said there's a workshop later on. But go back to your schools. If not all schools are here, talk to your colleagues in other primary schools to make sure collectively we're demonstrating that impact and the difference it has made to your students in school. And that's sort of my big ask for you all.
Thank you very much, Sue and Jane. I'll just probably add to that from me is just around the importance of publishing those reports. As an active partnership, our role is we still did go into Cornwall, into all of the primary schools in Cornwall over the summer holidays to look at the impact of the premium in Cornwall. And there still is a number of schools that are not publishing their reports. So as Jane said, if you can share this message with other colleagues, I know you speak to other people from other schools, please make sure we're publishing the reports on the impact and also on the impact on participation and attainment as well. And we've got to do that this year with the underspend earlier on, and then with the your actual reporting for this year at the end of July. So really, really important for us on that. Sue, I feel the next question, maybe schools deliver extracurricular activity, has maybe been answered. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, there is, if you don't mind, Tim. It's about being creative, and lunchtime activities are permissible because it only talks about after school. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you very much. That's good. And I think, as Jane pointed out, there was an early comment in the chat as well, which again, that's up to your individual school, but there is an option in there which you could look at as well. Jane, probably going to come back to you. The future for the school games and the Cornwall, and for us, the Cornwall school games.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. So there's probably a few elements to this question. So first of all, I'm acutely aware there are probably some SGOs on the call who are sitting there thinking, what is going to happen to the funding for school games organisers? So again, just to give you the reassurance, we are doing all we can, obviously working with DCMS, Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and the Department for Health and Social Care to make sure obviously that continues post-March. Again, slight challenge obviously with a 1-year spending review with the Chancellor, but again, it's really important, and we're doing all we can obviously to, as soon as that spending review is announced, is we get a very, very quick sort of confirmation that will continue, just to give you that reassurance, because I know it's a bit unnerving. So let's just work together on that. And again, by virtue is that I don't think the day goes by that people say about children's activity levels have really struggled, in the situation. And obviously with our active lives, that's going to even paint a bleaker picture. So again, I just think, even though, let's not get into the argument as in, even though it's well documented activity levels and yet they stop extracurricular, let's not have that debate now. But again, people know, that children's activity levels are important. In terms of the school games specifically, I mentioned that obviously we're launching our 10-year strategy. It won't go into specifics like we will do the school games. It will be very high level, but it'll be followed up with an implementation plan, which will obviously go into the detail. Certainly from Sport England, school games, competition remains really important. We want a broader offer as possible, and there are some groups of children who really like that competitive. Again, the challenge obviously with the work that the Youth Sport Trust has been doing about reframing competition, so it tries to engage those least active children about different forms of competition themselves. So certainly from our point of view, Sport England's, Sport England, we see the school games continuing. We'll obviously work with active partnerships and schools about what does that look like going forward for the children, young people, who may take part in it. But, certainly as in we see it as a key important in terms of that offer for activity for children, young people.
Thank you very much, Jane. I'm going to bring in Dan Lugg here about more secondary school support cluster events.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to approach that from sort of what's the benefit for a secondary school to have a cluster linked to them or work with them. We're very lucky in Peninsula that we have that, and especially here at Penryn when I am. So I'm just going to try and fly through the benefits. So the obvious one is transition. It's a really useful transition tool, but I won't go too deep into that because I know there's a question later. Another one is you've got a lot of leadership opportunities on your doorstep straight away. So I know a lot of you secondaries will run sports leaders courses through your BTEC, through your GCSE. You might do the YST leadership projects as well. So you've got an outlet for them pretty easily done. Here we find we get a better flow through into year 7. So it's a stronger kind of groups that are coming into our school. So by working with the primaries and having a host of competition, teachers CPD, things like that, we find they have better skills and fundamental physical literacy and higher levels of physical activity. So when they get here in year 7, they're raring to go for clubs and just being involved and generally active, which has been really, really good, especially this year. As a cluster, you get to work with those PE teachers, the PE leads in the primary schools. You can offer them CPD. You can talk to them about having a shared ethos, what you're trying to achieve together across the primaries and the secondaries. So it's a smoother transition from the primaries into the secondaries. Lots of little things that you can do. One of the things that we did this year was all the year 6s in our primary clusters got a PE and sport profile that they filled in before they got here. So they sent that in so we could have a look through that and get a picture of where they were and where they're at and what their interests were, so we could get ready for September in terms of extracurricular PE and targeting things where we needed to. Hopefully that's okay.
That's very comprehensive, Dan. Thank you very much. I'm conscious I want to make sure everyone gets a break before the next session. So I am just going to go on and just show you on the screen here. There was 6 more questions. I'm just going to bring in Chris Cause just around the secondary school membership of YST, and then that'll be the final question. So is Chris there just to come in on that question 11 that's on there around the secondary membership of YST?
Yeah, morning, Tim. Thanks ever so much indeed, and morning, everyone. The answer to that question is yes. But in this particular example, which is Power of an Active School, which is one of our CPD programs, what I would potentially be doing is speaking to that individual school to find out where are they on their next stage of their journey with regards to PE school, sport and physical activity. I know that's a pretty plain answer, but there is benefits. What I would say is that our membership offer, this is not just for secondaries, but for primaries and special schools as well, is our membership offer changes annually and really helps to meet the needs of the schools and obviously the children and young people in your schools. And being a member school as well adds additional benefits. I'm not going to go into the details, but please look on our website or contact myself if you'd like some more information. But I think it's just if you allow me, Tim, just to mention also that actually you don't have to be a member school to access any of our products, solutions, resources. It's not about that, and it's just off the shelf. We also work with clusters of schools and put bespoke packages together, and also with multi-academy trusts as well. And finally, and I'm sure some of you would have seen this on our website, there's a lot of free to access opportunities now. Resources, best practice guidance and support that's on our website, youthsporttrust.org/coronavirus support, not only just for schools and for teachers, but also for families as well. So if you haven't looked at that, have a good look, because there's lots of free to access information there as well, and resources. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much, Chris, and we'll get that link put in the chat so everyone can pick that up. There is other questions there that we've not got around to answer. There is some other questions that have been sent in, some quite interesting ones for you, Jayne, around the Sport England strategy and any insight moving into the next strategy for children and young people. But we'll get these sent through, and hopefully it's okay for Jayne and Sue can still answer these questions, and we'll get them pulled together as we move forward. So again, I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel there, and I like that Q&A session. It's a shame that we've run out of time on that, but as I said, we'll get that pulled in. So a huge thank you to those guys for being on the panel, and a massive thank you especially to Jayne and Sue for coming down. I'm just going to move on and get into the rest of today and how the rest of today is going to work. Before I do that, quickly, there's some useful links here. So I know we've had afPE and Sport England on, and obviously you've probably all seen the DFE guidance that was put out. These links are going to be posted in the chat. So again, if you want to make some quick access to these links as well, you can see then the DFE, some FAQs from afPE and Sport England, and this COVID-19 briefing around attitudes and behaviours. So you'll see those links quite simple in the chat, make it kind of easy for you guys to pick that up and reference those documents as we've got there. It did get touched on, I think Jayne mentioned it. Next week, we start the Cornwall virtual Winter School Games. So this complements the offer that's been out from your school games organisers around virtual competitions throughout the year. And this is a chance where we can all come together over this week and take part in a number of different events. It's not too late to register. So again, this link's going to be put into the chat and you can still register and take part in the different challenges that we've got for Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 and secondary school children next week. So please do get involved in that. That would be great. Another opportunity, a huge focus county-wide in Cornwall around active travel. A lot of work with Cornwall Council and Sustrans, who've produced a great toolkit on the Cornwall Council website. So please do have a look at that. And also we're looking for schools to nominate an active travel champion for their school. And we can then work with them about how we increase levels of active travel within the school at the moment. Again, which links to a number of different things around obviously the climate emergency, but also around activity levels for children. And that bit that came up earlier with Jayne about being active as a family and doing things together, which I think active travel's got a great role to play in that. Right, so our next session is 11:45 to 12:15. And again, not everybody may have booked onto all of the sessions today. That's absolutely fine. So we're going to make sure you've got time to go and get a coffee, get a cup of tea. And then the cluster networking session, you should have been sent a link to each one of them. That's against your 4 schools games areas. And that's a half an hour networking session, an opportunity for you to talk, reflect on what you've heard this morning. And that'll be facilitated by your school games organisers in those 4 sessions that move through. And again, if you want to go to one of them and you haven't got a link, then if you email lewis.sanders@cornwall.gov.uk and that email address will get put into the chat as well, he can send you out a link for the relevant one for that networking session. We've then got a lunch break. Unfortunately, we're not supplying lunch. We're not providing lunch today, so that's up to yourselves. And then we go into the 2 workshops this afternoon. So we've got the first workshop 1 till 2 p.m. and then the second workshop 2:15 to 3:15. And again, there's 12 workshops on offer this afternoon running at different times. So hopefully you've received the links for those workshops if you're planning to attend them. That's the 6 there that you can see. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see them on the screen there. And then we've got the second 6, which are there. And again, they're running at different slots within those workshops 1 and workshops 2 as well. And great to see some best practice sessions from our primary and secondary colleagues as well. So again, if you've not received a link from that, we can send those links through to you for this afternoon. For me, it just leaves me to say, as we move forward, that if you've got any further questions or anything, you can email through to myself or to Lewis, which is in there. All of the presentations and recordings are going to be available to download from our website, and every delegate that's registered will be emailed a feedback survey. So please do complete that and let us know how we got on. It's the first time we've done it virtually, so we do want to get some feedback around how the days worked and how it's worked for you. It just leaves me to say enjoy the rest of the day and don't forget that challenge at the start. Can we create the right environment for children to be physically active during and on the recovery from COVID-19? Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of today.